The grease never fully washes out. 11 years of it, and I stopped trying. That's not resilience. That's just what happens when a woman runs out of the energy to want things for herself. I kept walking past the man in the road. I told my feet to keep moving. They didn't listen. One choice. One stranger standing in the rain, face turned up to the sky like he was waiting for someone who wasn't coming. And everything I had spent years carefully not building, every wall, every lowered expectation, every practiced smallness, came down. Not because he needed me, because somewhere underneath all that grease and exhaustion, I still could. If you've ever done something that cost you and you did it anyway, stay. You'll recognize what comes next. Subscribe so you don't lose the story. These find the women who need them. Santa Fe does something strange in the rain. Every other desert city just gets wet. Here, the water hits the adobe and releases something from the walls. Decades of heat, of red dust, of all the things this city has absorbed and never said aloud. By midnight, the whole plaza smells like the earth is remembering itself, like something old has been given permission to breathe. I didn't notice any of that on the walk home from Lupe's diner. I noticed the blister on my left heel. I noticed my uniform was still damp from the soda spill in booth 7. I noticed the 11:48 bus pulling away from the stop on Guadalupe, its taillights smearing red across the wet pavement, and the 40-minute wait for the next one settling over me like a second shift. Vera had clocked out at 9. I'd stayed to cover her table. I always stayed to cover somebody's table. It's fine, I told myself. It's fine, it's fine. I kept walking. Head down, shoulders forward, the particular posture of a woman who has learned that looking small is faster than looking approachable. 2 blocks from the stop, the streetlight above the intersection at Old Santa Fe Trail had been flickering for a week. The city hadn't fixed it. The city never fixed the lights in this part of town. I almost missed him. He was standing in the middle of the intersection, not at the edge, not on the crossing lines, but dead center, in a suit that had no business being in this rain. Dark wool. Good cut. Completely still, while the water ran off him in sheets, while headlights swept past and drivers swerved and one truck laid on its horn long enough to rattle the windows of the closed gallery on the corner. He didn't flinch. He was holding a wallet to his ear, talking into the card slot. My feet stopped before I told them to. Don't, I thought. The bus. Your heel. $41 until Friday. Don't. A sedan clipped the puddle at the curb and threw a wall of water across the intersection. He stepped backward exactly once, then returned to his spot. Still talking. Still waiting for an answer from the wallet. I dropped my bag on the sidewalk and ran. The water came through my shoes in the first 3 strides. By the time I reached him, I was soaked to the knee, and I didn't care because up close he was older than I'd realized, late 70s, maybe more, with a kind of face that had been handsome for so long and had simply kept going past that and become something more interesting. Deep lines. Silver hair plastered flat by the rain. And eyes that, when they finally found me, were perfectly clear. That was the part that stopped me cold. Not confused. Not frightened. Clear and very, very far away. Sir. I put my hand on his arm. He didn't pull back. You need to come out of the road. He looked at me the way you look at someone you were just thinking about.
Rosario, he said.
Not a question. A recognition.
No.
My name is Chloe. Come on. I know. He patted my hand, once, with the patient authority of a man who has been right about most things. I know who you are, Mija. He let me walk him to the curb. He let me guide him under the awning of the closed gallery without any of the resistance I'd braced for. He sat on the bench there like he'd been meaning to sit all along, and he looked at the wallet in his hand with a faint, private embarrassment. I was trying to reach my son, he said. With your wallet. The phone looks different now. He turned it over. They keep changing the phones. My uniform jacket was thin and already wet, but I took it off and put it around his shoulders without thinking. He was shivering in that deep, bone-level way that takes longer to stop than it should. His suit jacket was soaked through. Underneath it, His dress shirt had gone translucent. The cufflinks were gold.
Heavy.
The kind of weight you don't buy, you inherit. I stood there in my damp t-shirt and did the fast arithmetic of someone who has been doing fast arithmetic her whole life. He was rich. Clearly rich. Which meant either someone was looking for him or someone had decided to stop looking. Neither option was comfortable. Both of them were my problem now because I was the only one who had stopped. "Do you have a name?" I asked. "Diego." He said it the way people say things they are proud of. "Diego Aurelio Knox." "Okay, Diego. Is there someone I can call?" He reached into his breast pocket, the inside one, the one that had stayed dry, and produced a card. Not a business card. Something older. Thick cream stock, no logo, just a number written by hand in ink that had stayed sharp for what looked like years. I looked at it for longer than I needed to. Then I dialed. One ring. The line opened without a word. Not voicemail. Not a greeting. Just a quality of attention on the other end, a listening so complete it had a texture to it, like a room that has been quiet for a very long time. "Hello." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I have a man here, Diego Knox. He was in the middle of Old Santa Fe Trail. He's okay, but he's cold, and I think." "Where?" Not a question. The voice was low, unhurried, and already certain of the answer before I gave it. I told him the intersection. "Stay there." The line went dead. I lowered the phone. Diego was watching me with that clear, faraway expression, the wallet back in his hands, turning it slowly like a worry stone. "Marco is coming?" he asked. "Someone is coming," I said. His name was my son, Diego said, with absolute confidence. "He always comes." He said it the way you say something you have tested and found true. Not hope. Fact. I sat beside him and tried not to shiver. I was wet and cold and still 40 minutes from home, and my heel was bleeding into my shoe. I thought about the bus. I thought about the $41. I thought about the exam I hadn't finished studying for, and the eviction letter I'd been moving from counter to counter for 3 days without opening. Diego began to hum something I didn't recognize. "4 minutes. That's what my phone said when I checked. 4 minutes between the call ending and the sound of engines. Not one, not two, 3 black vehicles moving down the street in a formation that had nothing casual about it. They stopped in a semicircle. The headlights caught the rain and turned it silver. The doors opened. The men who got out were large and still-faced and dressed in dark clothes that absorbed the light. I stood up. My legs did it before I decided. Diego made a small sound behind me. I stepped in front of him. I didn't plan it. My body just went there, hands out, weight forward, everything in me saying not him to people who had not given me any reason to be afraid of them yet. I was aware, dimly, that this was not a sensible position. I was 5'6" in wet canvas shoes with a tip pen in my apron pocket and no particular plan. I held my ground anyway. The men didn't move. They looked at me the way people look at something unexpected, not threatened, just recalibrating. Then the back door of the center vehicle opened. And the night changed. He didn't move like the others. He moved like someone who had learned a very long time ago that speed is for people who are not certain of the outcome. Silver white hair. A pale suit that the rain didn't seem to touch. A face that was composed of angles I couldn't quite assemble into a whole, not because there was anything wrong with it, but because looking at it directly felt like trying to see something that had learned to deflect attention. He walked into the light and looked at his father. For 1 second, something crossed his face that he didn't intend to show. It was gone before I could name it, sealed back behind an expression that gave away nothing. He looked at Diego. Then he looked at me. At my outstretched arms. At my soaked uniform. At my feet, planted between him and his father like that would help. "Move," he said. "Prove you're his son," I said back. The men behind him went very still. His eyes, dark, so dark the rain-washed streetlight barely touched them, stayed on my face, measuring something. Not my size. Something else. He keeps a ceramic tile in his right coat pocket, he said. His voice was quiet, the same voice from the phone. From the kitchen of the house he grew up in a city that doesn't exist the way it did anymore. He thinks it helps him find his way home. Behind me, Diego made a soft sound. Something like relief. My arms came down. The man who was Carl Knox walked past me to his father, and the night, which had been cold and loud and indifferent, went quiet in a way I hadn't expected, like a hell breath finally released. I stood there in the rain, shivering in my t-shirt, and watched a powerful man kneel in a puddle beside an old one without a second's hesitation. I didn't know what any of it meant yet. I only knew that I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to see, and that he already knew I was watching. His hands were the first thing I cataloged. Not his face, not the silver hair, not the way the rain seemed to fall around him rather than on him. His hands. Large, still, no rings, hanging at his sides with the particular quality of a person who has trained themselves not to reach for things. I have spent 11 years reading people in the 60 seconds before they decide whether to be difficult, and the hands are always where it starts. His told me, controlled, deliberate, capable of a great deal that he is currently choosing not to do. He crouched beside Diego without looking at me again. He said something low, in Spanish, and Diego answered in the same key, not the wandering tone from before, but something steadier, a register I hadn't heard yet. Like the voice was still in there, when the right person called it forward. I stood back and watched Carl's face. He was listening to his father the way you listen to something you are afraid of losing. Not performing attention, using it. Every word Diego said, Carl received and filed and responded to without wasting a single syllable. He pulled his coat from his own shoulders and wrapped it over the one I'd already given, so Diego was wearing both of us at once. Diego patted Carl's cheek once, with the flat of his palm, and said, "You're late." Carl said, "I know." One of the men brought a blanket from the vehicle. Another produced a flask. Carl stood, and for the first time, he turned to look at me fully, not the cataloging glance from before, but something more direct. It was the look of a person deciding how much to admit. "Come," he said. "I'm fine," I said. "I'll wait for the bus. The next bus is 41 minutes. I did not ask how he knew that. He walked to the middle vehicle and opened the rear door. He did not gesture toward it. He did not say anything else. He simply stood there, holding the door, with the steady patience of someone who has learned that waiting is cheaper than arguing. Diego was already being guided toward the seat by one of the other men. I watched the careful way they handled him. No hurry, no condescension, no one treating him like a problem to be managed. They held his arms like they meant it. I got in the car. The interior smelled of cedar and something older I couldn't name, not musty, just deep, like a room that has been well kept for a very long time. Diego fell asleep before we cleared the plaza, his head tipping sideways until it rested against my shoulder. He was warm now, or warm enough. His breathing evened out into something regular. Carl sat on the other side of the partition, facing forward. He didn't check his phone. He didn't look at me. He watched the wet street through the window the way you watch something that requires monitoring, and he did not speak for so long that I stopped waiting for him to. The city slid past. The old streets. The mission walls. The places where Santa Fe keeps its actual age hidden behind its performed one. "Thank you," he said. His voice at low volume was different. Less command, more texture. "He was in the road," I said. "That's not a favor. That's just..." I stopped. "That's just what you do." He turned to look at me then. The streetlights moved across his face in intervals, and in each one he looked slightly different, not younger or older, just variable, the way very old photographs of people are variable. Like the camera couldn't quite catch what was actually there. I looked away first. He walked me to my door. I hadn't invited him. He had not asked. He fell into step beside me on the stairwell of my building with the same unargued certainty as everything else he did, and I was too tired to have the conversation about it, so I let it happen. 3 flights. The smell of the building, someone's refried beans, and underneath that, the particular mildew that lives in the walls of old rentals and never fully leaves. I saw him register it. He didn't flinch. He didn't comment. The notice was taped at eye level, bright red against the peeling paint of my door. I knew what it was before I read it. I had been knowing what it was for 2 weeks, which is not the same thing as reading it. The knowing sits at the edge of your vision, and you keep not looking directly at it, because looking directly makes it real. I ripped it off the door. I crumpled it. I held it in my fist, and did not look at Carl. "It's a timing issue," I said. "With my bank." He said nothing. The silence was not uncomfortable, exactly. It was witnessing. The kind of silence that doesn't offer help or pity, just stays. I had not had someone simply stay in a long time. I unlocked the door. I turned around. He was reading the notice. Not because I had shown it to him. He had simply read it over my shoulder, the way you read something that is right in front of you, without asking. "I have it handled," I said again. He nodded.
Once.
The nod of a person who is not going to argue with an obvious lie, and who is also not going to pretend he believes it. "What are you?" I asked. I don't know where it came from. The hour, maybe. Or the way he'd taken up space in my stairwell without claiming it, without threatening it, just occupied it the way things occupy space when they have been somewhere long enough to earn the right. I was 34 years old, and I had lived in enough rooms to know when something wasn't adding up, and nothing about Carl Knox was adding up. He looked at me. The pause before he answered was the longest thing I'd experienced all night, longer than the wait for the bus that didn't come, longer than the rain, longer than 11 years of shifts where no one looked at me straight on. "Old," he said. "That's not." "Vampire," he said. Same tone. The tone of a man reading a line from a document he has had to read many times, has made his peace with, and is no longer surprised by anyone else's reaction to. I stood in my doorway. I looked at him. "Okay," I said. "How long?" He looked at me the way a person looks at something they were not expecting. Like the shape of the room had changed. "A very long time," he said. I nodded. I went inside. I closed the door. I stood in my kitchen for a while with the crumpled notice on the counter. I smoothed it flat. I read it. I did the math I had been avoiding for 2 weeks, and the number was exactly what I knew it would be. Then I opened the door again. He was still there. "Tell me about the job," I said. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who has been waiting, not tonight, not for me specifically, but in the larger sense for the kind of person who doesn't run. The car was still idling at the curb below. I watched the rain work its way down the streetlight. I had walked out of one kind of life tonight. What I had walked into, I couldn't yet name. Only that the door had closed behind me, and the dark outside was warmer than anything I had left. I slept 3 hours. Not because I wasn't tired. I was the kind of tired that lives below the muscles in the place where decisions get made, but because the math kept running. I'd lie still for 20 minutes, and then I'd be back at the kitchen table, moving the same numbers around like rearranging them would change what they added up to. They never do. The numbers are always already finished with you by the time you start looking at them. $41. $1,200 owed. The notice smoothed flat on the counter because I'd crumpled it once already, and that had not helped. At 7:03 my phone buzzed.
"Don't come in today."
"Mr. Reyes saw the cars last night, says you bring the wrong kind of attention. Your check will be ready Thursday. Don't bother calling." I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I wanted to be sure I wasn't misreading the part where 11 years ended in a text message with no capital letters. I set the phone face down on the counter. I went to the bathroom and turned on the shower and stood outside it for a while, listening to the water run. The pipes in this building take 2 minutes to warm. I had counted on those 2 minutes every morning for 3 years. That small, reliable thing that the water would eventually come warm had been a kind of structure. I stood outside the shower and felt the structure go. I let the water run until it went cold again. I never got in. The suitcases were on top of the closet. Both of them, the large one and the one with the broken wheel that I'd been meaning to repair since the year before last. I pulled them down and set them open on the bed, and then I stood looking at them for a long time. The room looked different with them open.
Smaller.
Like the space itself was already practicing letting me go. I started with the things that mattered. My laptop, my sketchbooks, the watercolor set I'd bought secondhand from the art school's clearance sale 3 years ago. The painting I'd done of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains at dusk, rolled in a towel, because I didn't have a case for it. Then clothes. Then the coffee mug my sister had given me before she moved to Phoenix, which I kept even though we didn't talk much anymore, because some objects are the last version of something you're not ready to fully put down. I was taping a box of books when the knock came. 3 times. Unhurried. My whole body knew it wasn't Kowalski. Kowalski knocks like he's owed something, short and insistent. The knock of a man reminding you of a debt. This was a different kind of knock entirely, the kind that does not need a second attempt. I opened the door. Carl Knock stood in my hallway in a different suit than last night, charcoal gray, and he looked entirely too composed for 7:40 in the morning in a building that smelled like someone's boiled coffee and old carpet. His eyes went to the open suitcases behind me. He took in the boxes, the stripped-down surfaces. He did not say, "I see you're leaving." He did not say, "I heard about Lupe's." He said, "My father asked for you this morning." I leaned against the doorframe. He asked for Rosario. He asked for the woman from the rain. Carl looked at me directly. He knows the difference on his good days. Today was a good day. I did not know what to do with that. So I stepped back and let him in. He sat at my kitchen table without being invited to sit, which should have irritated me and didn't. He folded his hands on the surface, those still, controlled hands, and he told me what he was offering. Live-in caregiver. Diego's companion, not his nurse. A room at the compound, my own entrance, full board. A salary that he named in a number that I made him repeat because I thought I had misheard it. I had not misheard it. "I have conditions," I said. "Name them." "I finished my degree. Online, at my own pace, I don't drop out. There's a library at the compound. The internet connection is better than anything you have here. I'm a caregiver, not staff. Not someone you reassign when Diego's having a bad week." Agreed. "And I'm not a prisoner. I can leave." He looked at me steadily. "You can leave whenever you choose. 3 conditions. 3 immediate agreements, no friction, no counter." I had prepared for negotiation the way you prepare for an argument you expect to need, and the absence of it left me off balance in a way I hadn't anticipated. A man who haggles is working something out. A man who simply agrees is either very confident or giving you something he's already decided you'll earn. "I want it in writing," I said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a folded document on my table. I looked at it. I looked at him. He had brought it already prepared. I thought about what that meant, that he had written the contract before he knocked on my door, which meant he had come here certain of the conversation's direction before I'd said a word. I noticed that. I did not comment on it. Some observations are more useful kept. I read it. Every line. He sat across from me and did not rush me, and the apartment was very quiet, and outside the window the morning light was doing something clean to the street below, the particular gold of Santa Fe at 8 in the morning before the day decides what kind of day it's going to be. I signed it. We were on the 2nd floor landing when Kowalski appeared at the bottom of the stairs. He had the expression he always wore when he was coming up to collect, tight around the mouth, already composed for an argument. He started up the stairs. Then he saw Carl. Carl stopped.
He didn't speak.
He didn't reach for anything. He simply stood on the landing and looked at Kowalski with the full, unhurried weight of his attention, the way a person looks when they have all the time in the world and none of it is yours. Kowalski stopped walking. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. Then he pressed himself against the wall, and we walked past him, and he said nothing at all, not about the rent, not about the notice, not about the boxes I was carrying. Not a word. On the sidewalk, I loaded my things into the back of the waiting vehicle while Carl held the door. I did not look back at the building. I had made a point for years of not looking back at things I was leaving. It was a habit I developed the first time I'd had to leave somewhere fast, and I kept it because it worked. But I felt the building behind me, the 3 years of it, the particular weight of a place that had been temporary for so long it had started to feel permanent. The door closed. The car was warm. It smelled of cedar. Diego was not in at this time, just the space, and the rain-washed city moving past the window, and the silence of a morning where everything had changed and almost nothing had happened. I wasn't sure if I'd been saved. But for the first time in years, someone had knocked on my door, wanting something other than rent. And the wanting had been specific. It had been me. Not my shift coverage, not my late payment, not my table section. The particular version of me that had run into the road last night and planted her feet and refused to move. That woman. That was who he'd come for. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and watched Santa Fe slide past and let myself, quietly and without comment, feel the full strange weight of being chosen. Being chosen and feeling like you belong are not the same thing. I spent the first week at the compound understanding that distinction in my body before I could put words to it. I had a room, a good one, high ceilings, a window that faced the Jemez Mountains, a desk where I could work. The bed was the most comfortable thing I had ever slept in, which meant I lay awake in it most nights cataloging the sounds of a house I didn't know yet. The way the heat came through the vents at 2 a.m, the footsteps in the corridor that moved without hurry, at hours when everyone who needs sleep is sleeping. The compound was full of a specific kind of quiet that had nothing restful in it, the quiet of a place that is always, at every hour, paying attention. I paid attention back. It was the only skill I had that felt transferable. Diego's good days and bad days did not follow a pattern I could map, which meant I stopped trying to map them and started just arriving. Every morning at 8. Tea first, he took it with too much sugar, and I never said anything about the too much sugar because that was not why I was there. Then whatever he wanted. The courtyard if the morning was warm, the library if it wasn't, the sunroom on the days when he woke up somewhere between himself and 1987 and needed the light to help him find the seam. The watercolors were my idea. I had brought them in my suitcase. Second-hand set, half the colors worn to the pan, and one morning when Diego was restless in a way that talking couldn't reach, I put them on the table in front of him without explanation.
He looked at them for a long time.
Then he picked up the brush. He painted the tile. The one from his pocket, small, cream-colored, hand-painted with a blue geometric pattern that I had studied closely enough by then to know it was a specific design, not a generic one. Talavera.
Old.
He painted it from memory, and the painting was not precise the way a copy is precise. It was precise the way a memory is, the important parts sharp, the edges softer than they should be, the blue slightly wrong in a way that was more true than accuracy would have been. He painted it every session. Always slightly different colors. Always the same tile. I did not know Carl was watching until I felt the room change.
Not a sound.
Not a movement. Just the quality of the air near the doorway becoming different, the way a room becomes different when someone enters it who has learned to enter rooms without announcing themselves. I turned. He was standing in the corridor just outside, one shoulder against the frame, and he was looking at his father's hands on the brush with an expression I had no frame for, too large for his face, too much in it at once, gone before I could read it properly. I turned back to Diego. I did not say anything. Neither did he. Some things you leave where you find them. Petra made her position clear in the first week. She was compact and gray-haired, and 60 years of loyalty had carved her face into something that did not move easily, and she watched me the way a person watches a structure they expect to develop a fault line. Not hostile. Clinical. You have no training, she said one afternoon in the corridor outside Diego's room. Not an accusation. A fact she was filing. No, I agreed. The last 2 caregivers had certifications. References. One had 20 years of experience.
She paused.
They lasted a combined 4 months. What did they do wrong? She looked at me. They tried to manage him. She said it the way you say something you have watched fail many times and are tired of watching fail. He is not a problem to manage. He is a man who has lost his map. Trying to give him yours just makes him more lost. She walked away before I could respond. I stood in the corridor and understood that this was the closest Petra came to instruction, and that I should treat it as such. I did not tell her that I already knew. That I had spent 11 years with people who needed a different kind of attention than the one they were getting, and that the only useful thing I had learned was how to give them the attention that was actually in front of me, rather than the one that was easiest to deliver. I kept that to myself. Trust with Petra was not going to be a conversation. It was going to be a record. He came back wrong on a Tuesday. Late, past midnight, which was not unusual, but wrong in the specific way of a person who has had to spend something they will need later and knows it. He walked into the kitchen and stood at the counter and did not reach for anything. Just stood. I was there because I couldn't sleep. I was there most nights, if I'm being precise. I did not ask what happened. I said, "Sit down." He looked at me. "You look like you need to sit down," I said. He sat. I made tea he didn't ask for because that was what I knew how to do in the presence of a person who was running low on something I couldn't name or fix. I put it in front of him. I sat across from him at the kitchen table and opened my laptop and continued the coursework I'd been doing before he came in, because the worst thing I could have done in that moment was make the moment about itself. He drank the tea. After a while, the rigid set of his shoulders changed. Not relaxed, exactly, but no longer braced. He looked at my laptop screen. "Art theory," he said. "Semiotics. It's due Thursday. Do you like it? The semiotics or the deadline?" The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. The thought of one. He did not leave when the tea was gone. He sat at my kitchen table and I sat across from him, and we were both quiet, and the quiet was the most honest thing that had happened between us yet. A week after that, in the garden at dusk, the hour when the light in New Mexico turns the color of old copper and everything it touches looks like it was painted rather than made, he stood beside me near the far wall, and I felt the cold that came off him the way you feel shade, a localized absence of heat, not unpleasant, not threatening, just different. He reached toward my face. Stopped. His hand stayed in the air between us for one full breath. Then he stepped back. "Good night, Chloe." He walked inside. I stayed in the garden until the copper light went gray, and I pressed my hand against the rough plaster of the wall, and I did not examine what had almost happened because examining it would require deciding what I wanted, and deciding what I wanted would require admitting that the decision was already made. In my jacket pocket, my fingers found the spare tile I had started carrying 2 weeks ago, a match to Diego's, bought from an old shop on Canyon Road, carried for the bad days when he reached and came up empty. It was warm from my body. Across the courtyard, the light in Carl's study was still on. I was not going to look at it again. I looked at it twice more before I went inside. "You've stayed this far. That means something to me, and I think maybe to you too. What's between them is still unspoken, and the war that's coming won't wait for them to find the words. Don't lose this story. Subscribe, and it'll find you wherever you are." The dress was the color of a forest that doesn't exist in New Mexico. Deep green, silk, cut in a way that assumed a body accustomed to being looked at. I was not that body. I stood in front of the mirror in my room at the compound and looked at the woman in it the way you look at a painting you're not sure you've understood. Aware there is something there, not yet certain what it means. The tile was in my jacket pocket hanging on the chair. I was leaving the jacket behind tonight. I was leaving a lot behind tonight. Carl had said, the other bloodline leaders need to see Diego standing. He had said it the way he said most things, as information, plainly, without asking me to have feelings about it. What he had not said, and what I had understood anyway, was that Diego was more lucid this week than he had been in months, and that the lucidity had a cost I hadn't been shown yet, and that Carl had paid it. Diego looked well. That was the word, well, in the old sense, which means more than healthy. He looked present. He walked into the main hall on Carl's arm, and his eyes were sharp, and he said my name, my actual name, not Rosario's, when he saw me across the room, and the way he said it made two of the assembled bloodline representatives turn to look at me. I smiled. I held the smile. I had 11 years of holding smiles under conditions far less comfortable than this. The hacienda was 40 minutes outside Santa Fe, up a road that wound through pinyon and juniper until the city disappeared entirely, and you were somewhere that felt older than whatever came after it. The interior had been renovated in the way that old money renovates, carefully, so that the money doesn't show, only the taste. Candles, ochre walls, the smell of sage and beeswax, and something underneath both of them, faintly metallic, that I put aside and did not examine. The guests moved through the rooms with the specific ease of people who have attended many rooms like this one and learned that the performance of belonging is indistinguishable from belonging itself. I watched them. Old habit. You can read a room in the first 4 minutes if you know what you're looking for, and what you're looking for is always the same thing: who is performing and who is present. Most of the room was performing. That was fine.
So was I.
The catering staff moved along the walls, trays, white gloves, the practiced glide of people trained to be invisible. I tracked them the way I tracked every service floor I had ever worked, not consciously, just with the part of my attention that had never fully stopped being a waitress. The rhythm of a room in service has a sound to it, a pattern. You feel it more than hear it, the same way you feel when a table is about to tip into difficult before anyone has said a word. Two of them were wrong. Not in any way I could have explained to someone who hadn't spent years on a floor. They moved correctly, tray angled, pace measured, but the movement came from somewhere other than habit. Habit is loose. What they had was rehearsed. There is a difference, and the difference lives in the shoulders, in the half-second before a turn, in the way the eyes move when they think no one is watching. Their eyes were not watching the room. They were measuring it. I crossed to Carl in 12 steps. I did not run. Running changes a room. I came up close on his left side, close enough that it read as intimacy to anyone watching, and I kept my voice at conversation level. The two servers, northwest corner, and the door to the east corridor. They're not staff.
He did not look at them.
He put his hand at the small of my back, light, a pressure I felt through the silk, and said something to the man he was speaking with, and that man nodded and moved away. Then Carl turned slightly toward me, and his voice was very quiet. How certain? Completely. He looked at me for 1 second, not checking whether I was sure. Something else. Get Diego to Petra, he said. East Garden.
Now.
I went. I did not see what happened in the main hall. I heard it, the crack of it, the way the air changed pressure in an old building when something violent enters it. I had Diego through the east corridor door before the screaming started, and Petra was already there, which meant she had been watching the same things I had been watching, and had been waiting to see if I would act. She took Diego's arm. She looked at me. "You'll do," she said. That was all. She moved him into the garden, and I turned back toward the sound. Carl came through the service door at a run. He grabbed my wrist, and we went down a staircase I hadn't known existed, into a corridor that smelled of old stone and something faintly mineral, and he pulled a door shut behind us and threw the bolt. Silence. Absolute, stone-walled silence, broken only by our breathing and the distant, muffled sound of order being restored above us. The room was a storage space.
Linens mostly.
A single light on a cord. Carl stood with his back against the door, chest rising and falling, and looked at me in a way that had nothing controlled about it. I was the one who spoke first. "Diego. Petra has him. He's out." His voice was rough from the run. "You spotted them before my security team did. Your security team wasn't watching the right things."
He looked at me. No.
They weren't. The stillness in the room was different from the stillness at the compound. That stillness was chosen. This one was what remained after everything else had been stripped away. He said, "If the Georgians had taken you tonight," he stopped. "Started again. They wouldn't kill you. That's not how they work. They would turn you. Without consent, without preparation, without." His jaw tightened. "It would be done as a message."
To me.
I held his gaze. I did not look away from what he was telling me. I understand, I said. You're not frightened. I'm very frightened, I said. That's not the same as flinching. He looked at me for a long time. In the overhead light, his face was stripped of every layer he usually kept in place, and what was underneath was not what I expected, not power, not calculation. It was the particular expression of a person who has spent a very long time being careful and has just run out of the careful. He crossed the room and kissed me. It was not gentle. It was not an attempt at gentleness. It was the kind of kiss that comes from a decision made somewhere below conscious thought, the kind your body makes while your mind is still composing arguments against it, and I kissed him back with the same completeness because I was 34 years old, and I had learned the hard way that hesitating in the moments that matter is its own kind of loss. He pulled back. His forehead came to rest against mine. His hands were in my hair. Everything has changed, he said. I know. A long breath. Both of us. God help us both, he said. The light on the cord swayed faintly. Somewhere above us, the hacienda was going quiet again. I pressed my hand flat against his chest and felt his heart. Slow, slower than it should have been. The heart of something that has learned to need very little. I thought, I am the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to this man. I did not say it. I held it instead, turning it over the way Diego turns the tile, carefully because the important parts are fragile, and I was not yet ready to know which parts those were. I had pressed my hand against his chest and felt his heart beating slow. That was the thing I kept coming back to in the days that followed, not the kiss, not the words after it, but that particular slowness. The heart of something that has learned to need very little, beating like it had all the time in the world. I had spent years moving fast through every room I occupied. And here was something that moved through centuries the way I moved through a Tuesday. I did not know yet what it would cost me to love that. I suspected I was going to find out. The lockdown came 6 days after the gala. Diego heard it first. He had been agitated since morning. A bad day, the fog thick, and he kept pulling at my sleeve and saying the chair was humming. I had redirected him twice, the way you redirect a person who is lost, gently, toward something else. The third time he said it, I stopped redirecting. I knelt beside the chair in the library. I ran my hand along the underside of the arm, the way you check a surface in low light, fingers reading what eyes can't reach. The bump was small. Plastic. A disc no larger than a coat button, wedged into a seam in the leather, a thread of red light pulsing so faintly you would never see it unless you were already looking. Diego patted my hand. I told you, he said, with the serene authority of a man who has been right about things for a very long time. I did not pull the device out. I sat back on my heels and thought about what it meant, that someone inside these walls had put it there, had been listening here, in this room where Carl made decisions he trusted to no one else.
The gala.
The security routes. All of it. I walked Diego to the kitchen and asked Maria to sit with him. Then I went to find Carl. I did not reach him. Bram reached me first. He was in the corridor outside the West Wing. Carl second, his oldest ally, a man who had been at the compound longer than the compound's current walls. I had never fully read him. That was my failure. I had been watching the wrong surfaces. He was not pointing anything at me. He was just standing in the corridor, in a way that meant I was not going to walk past him. You found it, he said. Yes. He looked at me with something that was not malice, worse than malice, actually. It was grief, the old and settled kind, the kind that has already made its decision. I didn't want you involved, he said. That's true. Whatever else you think of me, that's true. What do you have? I asked. A condition, he said. One that the Bloodlines Council has refused to treat for 60 years because treating it would require admitting it exists. I am not the enemy here, Chloe. I am the proof that the system devours its own. I believed him. That was the terrible part. I believed every word of it, and it did not change what I had to do next. The alarm broke before either of us finished the conversation, a sound like the whole compound inhaling, and then everything happened at once. I will not pretend I was composed. My hands shook. I ran. The Georgian team came through the East Service entrance, the one Bram had left unlocked. Petra's people met them in the corridor, and the sound of it was nothing like the movies, nothing like anything I had a frame for, sharp and final, and over faster than I could track. Bram had Diego. He was in the kitchen doorway with Diego's arm in his grip and his back to the exterior wall, and Diego was confused and small, and looking around for something familiar to anchor to. Carl was across the room with two of his security positioned between them, and the geometry was wrong. Bram was angled against the wall in a way that meant Carl could not get to him without exposure, and Bram knew it and Carl knew it, and they were both waiting for the calculation to change. I looked at the room the way I look at a canvas with a problem in it, not at the figures but at the negative space. The angles. What the composition was doing versus what it was trying to do. The cast iron pan was on the counter to my left, exactly where Maria kept it because Maria kept everything exactly where it was, always. Heavy.
Old.
The handle worn smooth. I looked at the wall behind Bram. The shelf. The row of ceramic canisters that had been there since before I arrived, lined up in order of size, the largest one at the end sitting slightly proud of the shelf edge the way things sit when they've been bumped and not quite corrected. I picked up the pan. I did not throw it at Bram. I threw it at the shelf. The largest canister came down. Bram flinched left, reflex unavoidable, the body moving before the mind, and Diego stumbled free, and Carl was already moving before the canister hit the floor. It was over in 4 seconds. Diego sat on the kitchen floor eating the honey that had spilled from the canister, with the placid concentration of a man who has decided this is simply what is happening now. I sat beside him. My legs had stopped working temporarily. That seemed fair. Petra appeared in the doorway. She looked at the pan on the floor. She looked at me. She did not say anything. She didn't have to. The council meeting was 3 weeks later. All the Southwest bloodline leaders convened at the compound. I was not supposed to be in the room. Carl had not told me to stay out of it, which I had decided to treat as permission. He stood at the head of the table, and he told them what Bram had told me. The condition, the refusal, the 60 years of a man being consumed by a structure that would not see him. He told it plainly, the way he told me he was a vampire, as information, without performance, trusting the weight of it to land without assistance. Then he said, "The council as it is constituted ends today." The room went very still. "It has existed for 400 years," one of the assembled leaders said. "Yes," Carl said. "That's long enough to know it doesn't work." He looked at me across the room then. Not for permission, he had already decided. He looked the way a person looks when they want to make sure the person who asked the question is present for the answer. Is there a world where this doesn't keep happening? I had asked it quietly 2 weeks ago, sitting at the kitchen table at midnight. He had not answered. He had gone upstairs and started building one instead. 3 months later, late winter. The sunlight in New Mexico in February is low and direct and merciless in the best way. It shows you everything, the dust and the cracks and the places where the plaster has worn through to the adobe underneath. And it also shows you the mountains, sharp against a sky so blue it looks like an argument. I was standing outside the compound when Carl came to find me. I had a receipt in my hand. The last table I had ever served at Lupe's, the slip from booth 7, the booth where I'd covered Vera's section the night everything changed. I had found it in the lining of my jacket weeks ago, folded flat, the ink still legible. I had been carrying it without knowing it, the whole time. Carl stood beside me and looked at the mountains. In front of the full council, I said, "You said, she stays, everything adjusts." "Yes." "You didn't ask me first."
No. He looked at me.
"Do you want me to ask now?" I looked down at the receipt. The date. The table number. The total. $11.40, which was the last transaction of my previous life. I folded it and put it in my pocket, next to the tile.
"No," I said.
He took my hand. We stood in the February light, and the mountains were very clear, and the compound behind us was warm and full of noise. Petra's voice, Diego singing something from the sunroom, the ordinary sounds of a house that had learned to include me. I had spent 34 years being looked past. I had learned to make the looking past my whole strategy. And then one night in the rain I ran toward a stranger, and the running led here, to this light, to this man's hand in mine, to a tile in my pocket and a receipt that proved I had always been worth more than the rooms I was offered. That woman ran into the road to save someone she didn't know. She was worth saving too. She just needed someone to see it. She is not the only one. In this city, in this world, there are other women who walked into something they couldn't explain and came out changed. Not all of them found what she found. Some of them are still in the middle of it, still deciding whether to run toward the thing that frightens them. If you want to hear their stories, stay. Subscribe and I'll find you when the next one is ready. This is where they live.